What's up, racing fans? I hope you guys are having an awesome week. I'm doing great. I'm super excited to be back making videos, continuing on this series, getting into Formula One. Just to remind you guys, this is my first year keeping up with Formula One, and so this is my first time having that kind of break. I'm not used to that as a racing fan watching some other series. So I'm excited to be back covering the series. And so we've got the Dutch GP. We're at the Circuit Zandvoort in Netherlands. And this circuit is known more for its sweeping corners, such as Schevellack, as well as Tarzanbocht, or the Tarzan corner hairpin at the end of the start-finish straight. And so what you'll see from this is a lot of these sweeping corner kind of actions throughout the race. We had an exciting qualifying session, a lot of wetness throughout the day yesterday. Everyone was trying to find grip early, while the session seemed to kind of dry off as we went along throughout the session. It was still a little bit spotty in some sections. We could see a clear dry line, and then the rest was kind of just not really working. It was kind of wet. And so because of the wetness, qualifying was riddled with 3 total reds. Overall, Gasly, Ocon, Stroll, and Hamilton kind of struggled in qualifying and were out in Q1 and Q2 respectively. Williams looked fantastic, and I was like, okay, maybe it's just because of the wetness, but they did seem to have a lot of pace, both ending up in the top 10 despite Sargent crashing out in Q3. He still had good pace to get up there in the first place. Very impressive on that end. Leclerc ended up getting into the barrier in qualifying. Mclaren seemed to have kind of the 1-2 punch as we got down into Q3, and Verstappen, as time kind of ended, came across the line and was able to solidify that pole position for the Dutch GP. It really looked like Albon, Alonso, and Hamilton did quite well, and it looks like they're probably going to be some competitors at the top of the grid come tomorrow. Some notable penalties from qualifying include Tsunoda, who impeded Hamilton in qualifying, which might have been why Hamilton was not able to move on to further qualifying sessions. Magnussen will start in the pits. He had a power unit change, and so he'll start there. And then notably, Daniel Ricciardo got into a wreck in one of the free practice sessions, an unfortunate incident, and it was either hit Piastri or wreck, and so he chose the wreck, and he ended up breaking a bone in his hand. And so you will see a new name on the grid, Liam Lawson. May not be super new. He is commonly discussed in other series, but he is somebody who's going to take his place for now and maybe the foreseeable future. I'm not sure what Ricciardo's recovery timeline looks like. But let's get into the race. It was an exciting one, and it was also a wet one as well. And so, as I mentioned, the race was very similar to qualifying in that it was wet. And you know what? Wet races, wet qualifying sessions, I love them. It mixes things up. We're going to get different strategies throughout. And so we see a lot of drivers playing it safe from the start. It's very wet. They don't want to wreck the first lap. And so through the first couple corners, we see it quite safe, as I mentioned. Not too much passing going on. Notably, I would say Fernando Alonso made a very good couple passes on that first turn or so, taking that inside line and catching enough grip to gain 2 spots. And but most everybody else was on slicks early, and you know how slicks work in the wet. You're going to slip and slide, right? You're not going to find much grip. And so finding tire temperature and finding grip was kind of few and far between among those first couple laps of the race. And so by lap 2 or 3, we start to see a lot of people dive into the pits and try to get onto intermediates. A lot of them started on softs, started on slicks. And so with the rain coming down harder, a lot of them opted, let's get in. But a lot of people actually stayed out and didn't opt to change their tires. And so which of these decisions is going to pay off in the end? And well, I guess we'll see, right? And so with the pit sequencing kind of being a mishmash, we get Lando and George Russell, fighting for the lead early on in the race. Who would have thunk that we would have Lando Norris and George Russell fighting for the lead on lap like 2 or 3 of the race? Not me. But George Russell ends up winning that short skirmish between the two of them. And that will not be the end of the Mercedes and Lando Norris saga today. But not for long does Russell hold the lead, as our friend Sergio Perez, who pitted right away to get on to Inters, he kind of comes into the picture. He has super sweet grip with that new tire change, and he's able to overtake Russell quite easily for the lead early on in the race. A few laps later, though, we get the rain holding up, and so it seems like we're going to get this stop and go. This rain cannot make up its mind. Kind of like I don't know, a couple other instances throughout the year. But apparently this is pretty standard for this track and for this region. And so that's, I guess, a good thing if you like the rain. But throughout the race, we saw this kind of spottiness. And so slicks came back on for many, as we see Red Bull 1-2 for a while. And so because of the rain holding up, a lot of people opted to go back to slicks off of Inters. And so many of them did that, and over the course of the race, everybody went back to slicks for at least a short period of time. And then on lap 16, we see Logan Sargent get into the wall yet again, which he did in qualifying as well. I heard the announcer say he had not gotten into the wall all season, and he finds a way to do it twice in one weekend. And it's unfortunate for him, because I felt as though Williams was running quite well this weekend. It seemed like Zhao Guanyu was running quite high throughout the front half of this race. However, we start to see him fall after pit sequencing kind of goes through. People get their tires figured out, and we see him getting beat up a little bit and start fading throughout the race. Alonso has some issues in the pits, maybe cost him a spot or so, but was able to get out of the pits and gain that spot right back from Carlos Sainz. And so that was good to get that spot back. As I mentioned, Williams looked quite good early, right? And they looked good throughout the weekend. Albon has been a name in the rumor mill across the board for a new drive next year, because he's impressed many, especially in the past couple weeks. And he's no stranger to the success. And so he's doing it again, coming back off the break, showing a lot of pace. And we really start to see him climb in this second half of the race. Around lap 62, rain comes again. Woo! So we get the rain, becomes an issue. A lot of people switch back off of the slicks onto the rain tire, onto Inters, and a yellow shortly after comes, because the rain starts to like really come down. Like, it's not just like a little drizzle now, it's like a monsoon, as many would describe. And Perez slides off and just brushes the wall slightly. He's still able to stay in the race, and he ends up making the positions he lost from this, but many were hollering about this, and rightfully so. It would have been unfortunate if he was out. But everyone starts to have issues with hydroplaning because of this monsoon-esque rain that is falling. And so a lot of people decide, we got to take it really slow, because we see Tsunoda and Zhao Guanyu get off in the same turn and hit the wall. And so at that point, race control has to make a decision. Is it really safe to race or not? And it ends up stopping racing for quite some time. And then they end up going green, and it seems as though there's no rain, pretty clear conditions, and they're able to finish this race under green conditions. And that's, good for many, I guess. And so Russell gets taken out in this second half, or this last third of the race. Russell gets taken out by Lando Norris. As I mentioned, the Mercedes McLaren saga was going to continue, and I didn't think that, it's hard to see because water splashing everywhere, but it didn't seem like there was like egregious contact here. It just, F1 cars are extremely fragile, and so unfortunately George gets taken out there. But that everything else kind of slides into place. There wasn't too much action in that last third. And so let's take a look at the results, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the race. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw up the results on the screen, and let's see how everything's squared away here. And so we see Max Verstappen get his 9th win of the season. Props to him, getting 9. Despite all the craziness, he was able to avoid any yellows, any wrecks, any pitch strategy shenanigans. He outright won despite all the craziness, so props to him. Fernando Alonso, seems like this break did him well. Maybe he is getting a little older, needs a little bit of a break. Just kidding. They were able to find some pace this weekend, and he actually scored the fastest lap of this race. So props to him getting back on the podium. And then we see Pierre Gasly, Alpine impressing here. Pierre at least impressing and getting the third place on the podium as well. Sergio Perez, despite the little skirmish throughout the race, getting off track, his race team made the right decision, getting onto Inters early, and it put him in a position to finish high up and compete for a podium spot. We see Carlos Sainz. Ferrari had the issue with Leclerc earlier on in the race, and it's nice that Carlos was able to finish and have a clean race. However, I feel like they probably are hoping for more, and it didn't really seem like he was a true contender throughout the race. Lewis Hamilton getting 6th place, Lando Norris 7th place. Honestly, I felt like Lando had more pace. He qualified quite well, and he just things didn't really slice his way this race. Alex Albon, as I mentioned, he's been the hot topic around town. Williams looked great this weekend, and maybe he could have done a little bit better than 8th. However, at the end of the day, we can't be upset about a Williams top 10. Oscar Piastri, didn't hear his name much this race. However, getting a top 10, pretty quiet top 10. Esteban Ocon, one of those names I mentioned, who had a rough qualifying session, so I'm sure he's happy to get a top 10 finish. And with Pierre Gasly finishing on the podium, maybe if you're Esteban, you are knocking yourself thinking, man, if I would have qualified a little better, I could have finished higher up in the standings here for this race. Lance Stroll, able to get a solid 11th. Didn't really do anything crazy here, but didn't qualify that well and was able to get 11th. Despite that, we got Hülkenberg in 12th. Lawson getting a 13th, stepping foot in an F1 car, subbing in for Ricciardo, and finishing 13th for the New Zealander. And so good props to him. And then we have Bottas 14th. Yuki getting a penalty, a 5-second time penalty for a collision. Would have finished a few places higher up. Didn't have like a terrible race, but I think that that kind of sealed the deal, having that penalty. Magnussen also received a 5-second penalty. Kind of a tough weekend for him, having to deal with that power issue and replacing that, and then falling 10 car lengths behind the safety car, causing a 5-second penalty for him as well. George Russell unfortunately ran into Lando Norris, and that caused his race to kind of effectively be over there. Zhou Guanyu, as I mentioned, was running quite well in the first part of the race. However, with that collision, ended up kind of sealing the deal for him, getting 18th. We see Charles Leclerc in 19th, and I think that he was the most memeable this weekend with his issues, and a lot of people saying that he should move teams, and if he's continuing to have all these issues, that he'd be best elsewhere. So we'll see that development as silly season gets on us here shortly. And then we see Logan Sargent getting 20th. I know that he hopes he could have done better, but you got to stay out of the wall, buddy. I know it's tough with the rain conditions, the wet conditions, but you've seemed to do well with not getting into the wall all season, and here we are this weekend struggling. But what are my thoughts on the race? I think anytime we can get a wet Formula One race, a wet qualifying, a wet weekend overall, we're in good shape. I don't think this race would have been all that exciting if we didn't have rain in the picture. We got a variation of strategy of tires. A lot of people that were able to contend that may not have been there if there wasn't the rain. And so it gave us some unpredictability in the mix. Though Max Verstappen was still dominant, and we have to just at this point just assume that it's going to happen and hope that there's actually good racing behind him. And I don't necessarily think there was like insane racing this race, but I think that the wetness gave us something to keep us watching. And so hopefully we get some mixing up here in the second part of the season. We have some pretty notorious tracks coming up on the schedule, and so I'm looking forward to seeing those for the first time as a new Formula One fan. But what does this look like for me? Well, I've got school starting up. I am a teacher, and so my schedule gets a little bit busier, but I'm still going to be uploading to the channel. And if you enjoyed the content, if you want to see more motorsports content, go ahead and give me a subscribe. give me a like, and that would really mean a lot to me. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers, trying to get the channel up to where I want it to be, and I want to create a community where we can discuss racing, discuss what's happening in the sport all across the board, Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, you name it. I'd like to discuss it at some point and get into it, and overall, I'm just trying to strive to be a better overall racing fan and to kind of diversify my portfolio. But thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video, and have a great week. Peace out.